Alright, yeah, welcome on in to some more Magic Arena. This week, we're going to be taking a look at a budget deck. It's Budget Bogles. So, for those who don't know what Bogles is essentially an archetype for getting a lovely little creature, usually very hard to deal with, something like an Andante Vanguard, or maybe a Danitha with lots of keywords on it. And you stick as many auras as you could possibly fit onto a single creature, and then swing in with just usually the one. So it does have its downsides. It's not a tier 1 deck by any stretch, but it is actually budget as well. Outside of the mana base, which is just 4 Glacial Fortresses, which are rare and easily swappable, we actually have only 8 rare cards in the deck in total, and most of them are actually not really required. So as far as rares are concerned, we got 2 Adorned Pouncers, however one comes with the Precon as well, so I'm only counting this as half of a rare. 2 Blackblade Reforged, we've got 2 copies of Admiral's Order, which you can absolutely just cut completely and put in whatever you like in, but I kind of like the Raid counter spell here. It's actually been quite useful. 1 copy of Forebearer's Blade, because I had one to hand and it seemed quite interesting. We went with it. And 2 copies of Shalai as well, which is actually a really good card for the blue-white Wrath Flash deck. Does play these as well, so these are actually, usable in a deck outside of this one. The reason why I like this deck so much, though, is because it's actually quite fast, so I feel like it's a good deck for grinding with. You either win or lose just based off of your starting hand alone. So you don't really have to hang around too long, and rank doesn't really matter all that much as well, so at the moment anyway, so you may or may not get ranks, but you'll get some quick games in anyway. So the idea is that we get some sort of creature like Andante Vanguard, and we start to stick auras on it. So we've got auras like Cartouche of Solidarity, 1 white for an enchantment aura. It gives the creature that it attaches it to +1/+1 and first strike, which makes it very hard to block after a while. And you also get yourself a backup creature as well, which is why I think this cartouche is very important. You get a backup creature as well, so if they do deal with your aurified creature, then you've actually got one left over as well, so you can use that. We've got 4 copies of Curious Obsession as well. 1 blue mana for Enchant Creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So yet again, if our creature gets dealt with, later down the line maybe, we'll have drawn a fair few cards off of this, because one of the main problems when it comes to Bogles and things like that is if you don't put it on a creature that's very hard to deal with, and it does get taken care of, you're usually out of the game. So we don't want our creature to die, because it's effectively going to be getting like a 3-for-1 for our opponent. If they manage to Vraska's Contempt our Danitha, for example, and it had 3 auras attached to it, that's a 4-for-1 for our opponent there. So we need to make sure that we've actually got the value straight back out of it. So Curious Obsession, allowing you to redraw your cards essentially and make sure you get everything you need, is really good. On the same level of that as well, we've got Cartouche of Knowledge, 1 and a blue for an enchantment cartouche. The creature itself gets +1/+1 and flying, and whenever this enters the battlefield, you actually get to draw a card. So it actually is a cantrip, replaces itself, and gives a pretty good form of evasion as well for things like the Adorned Pouncer, giving this flying, which would basically mean it's swinging over for 4 damage in the air on turn 3, if you could get it out at that point, is really good, especially if you can Eternalize it later down the line. It's another reason why there's 2 copies of Adorned Pouncer in here, is because the Eternalize basically means you've got 2 forms of a creature, and the second one is substantially more powerful when it actually comes to the late game and you're actually around the 5 mana range. Getting a 4/4 double striker and then just sticking on a Cartouche of Knowledge to swing for 10 in the air is pretty sweet. Andante Vanguard is here for burn-related removal spells and destroy effects and things like that. You'll notice that a lot of these creatures, in fact all of them, can't really play around Vraska's Contempt. Only Shalai allows you to do that, really. She's here to protect your boggled up creature by giving it hexproof, essentially. But the best we can do is give things indestructible and pretty good power and toughness. So Andante Vanguard allows us to pay 4 life to give it indestructible to the end of the turn, which means any lightning strikes, abrades, magma sprays, or anything like that are completely dead on the Andante Vanguard. and we can eventually gain our life back anyway, either by getting ourselves a Danither to equip up, which comes with lifelink, or actually using our 1 copy of Squire's Devotion to give the creature lifelink. The only reason I'm not using 2 copies, or even any more than the amount here with Squire's Devotion, is mostly because the cost is a little annoying, and the one creature that we do really want to stick our cartouches and auras and things like that on is Danither, and she comes with lifelink anyway, so maybe it's worth going to 2 copies of Squire Devotion. If you can't maybe have any of the rares that I've included here, then maybe that is the choice for you guys. What else have we got? Blackblade Reforged. Kind of a weird choice, I understand, but it is a 2 mana equipment. So what I was thinking with Bogles is because of the 3-for-1 potential that your opponent gets on his removal, I actually wanted to go a little bit slightly into the equipment side of it as well, because Danither, she is the build-around card after all, and she also does reduce the cost of equipment spells. So if you can get Danither down on turn 3, then on turn 4 with your 4 mana, you actually have the cost reduction on the Black Blade, which means it costs 1, and for 3 mana you can equip it to a legendary creature, which means you can give Danither +4/+4 on her turn, and swing for 6 First Strike, Vigilance, Lifelink, and that's usually pretty good at getting completely out of burn range, and also maybe a nice good life point swing if you're up against something like Red Deck Wins or something like that. Getting that swing, this is an instant win usually against Red Deck Wins if they can't get through, because the amount of life gain that you get every single turn with the Vigilance, so you can gain life on theirs if they try to attack, is really good stuff. So the choice of Admiral's Order is a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure about it, but it has saved me quite a lot of the time. So as I mentioned, like, the one weakness in terms of removal that we've got is Exile. So if our opponent goes to Vraska's Contemptors on turn 4, we hopefully will have at least 1 copy of Admiral's Order ready to go. And if they don't play around the raid mechanic as well, then you can actually cast this for 1 blue mana, which is disgustingly cheap, especially in a deck that really does appreciate really low to the ground mana cost cards. Oh yeah, also did skip by Dauntless Bodyguard as well. Similar to the Andanta Vanguard, this does allow us to have a little bit of utility on some later game creatures. So for 1 mana, we get a 2/1 creature. When it enters the battlefield, you choose another creature you control, and if you sacrifice Dauntless Bodyguard, that chosen creature can have Indestructible until the end of the turn. So like the Andanta Vanguard with its resiliency, with the pay 4 life, we can actually Dauntless Bodyguard one of our maybe cartouche and aura'd up creatures later down the line, because a Dawn Pouncer, for example, is one of the more fragile creatures that you can come across here. So being able to give it Indestructible for the turn, which maybe buys us sometimes to stick on enough auras to get out of burn range, or if it just would die in combat, we can just sacrifice it to make sure that we get that protection. Dauntless Bodyguard is also a really good turn 1 play as well. Nice 1 mana 2/1 to swing right out the gates, and then on turn 2, then you can put 2 cartouches on it to swing for 4. Usually with a lot of card draw and things like that, you end up keeping a pretty decent hand if you get the Dauntless Bodyguard down to swing on its own as well. But yeah, if you get the cartouche onto the Dauntless Bodyguard, it's swinging as a 3/2 First Striker, which barely any creatures in this format at that point in time, if any, actually can compete with. So really good early out the game start. Good for the aggro wins. I've actually won several games with the Dauntless Bodyguard being my aura load carrier of choice, which is it's not advised unless you can Dauntless Bodyguard the other Dauntless Bodyguard. You really just want to put it on something that can have resiliency, and it's all depending on the matchup, really. So if you know you're up against burn, you pick the Indestructible creature. If you don't think they've got removal, then it's always on Danither because of the keyword soup that she's got available. First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink is really good, and the cost reduction is sweet. Shalai, Voice of Plenty. We did mention her briefly. She is a 4 mana 3/4 with flying. She is legendary, which is unfortunate, but you know, we can get around it. She gives us, planeswalkers, and other creatures we control hexproof, which turns all of our creatures essentially into the Bogles that we dreamt of. They become untargetable, and Shalai has to be dealt with before any of our boggled creatures, which are far more menacing at that point in time. So really good stuff. It's an extra body on the board, an extra flyer, pretty decent booty as well, so it can block most stuff. The secondary ability on it, the 4 and 2 green, will never come into play because we don't run green lands and probably shouldn't even bother trying to either. It would just mess up our mana if we did. Finally, we've got 3 copies of On Serra's Wings. 3 and a white. This is the ultimate aura, and it is a beautiful bit of artwork there. Well done, Johan. You enchant a creature, and the enchanted creature is legendary, gets +1/+1, and has flying, vigilance, and lifelink. Most of the stuff that Danitha has, essentially. But the vigilance and lifelink is just disgustingly good, and the flying, to top it all off, is pretty great. The legendary tag is actually kind of relevant as well, with cast downs being a thing. You don't see them very often, but it is another way of protecting your creature against removal as well. So Danitha is already protected by that by default, but the rest of our creatures are not legendary, so they are very cast downable. The vigilance allows us to get around seal away as well. If you're playing against the blue-white control lists, then you want to be focusing on your vigilant creatures. So your vigilance off of the 1/1 warrior token. Maybe you want to put an aura on one of your creatures to get that token in order to play around seal away, and then stick all of your auras on that instead. But On Serra's Wings is the late game version of that. Cost reduction with Danitha as well means that even if you don't hit your 4th land drop after slamming Danitha down, you can actually stick On Serra's Wings on her with the cost reduction. The mana base is pretty simple. Maybe it needs a few colourless lands, but we don't really go into the game that late, so tending to graveyards isn't really anything that we care about. Neither is taking care of things like the Search for Azcanta, because the game hopefully shouldn't go on that long. So yeah, it's basically 8 islands, 11 planes. Most of our deck is white. There's only a couple of blue cards here and there, and they're 1 single blue mana for the most part, including the Admiral's Order. Really, we want to be casting that when it's got its raid, ideally, but you know. And 4 copies of Glacial Fortress, just to smooth out the lack of islands, we'll say, to bring them back up to pretty much an even mana color curve. Yeah, let's call it that. Anyway, guys, that is going to be the deck. I should mention that I did not include the Glacial Fortresses in the budget. I feel like including the mana base in the budget isn't too great unless it is the focal point of the deck. So you can absolutely just swap these Glacial Fortresses out for tap lands. It's not as ideal. You might even want to just go with some more basics, just because we want to be going out the gate as early as turn 1. Sorry, I'm not very well today. But yeah, I wouldn't include the mana bases in my budget, and you don't have to include them in the deck either. They are going to be useful most of the time, and I feel like if I'm going to display a deck off to you guys, then I just want to have the best mana that I can showcase with you guys, because it's really not the mana that the budget is built around as such. It's just more about the actual playability of the deck, and I certainly think that this one is on that curve. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you do want to check out the matches, there will be a link at the end of this video on the end card. The video itself will be released immediately as soon as you get this one, so like, subscribe. If you do like the deck, there is a little should we say quota to hit on this week's video as well. I mentioned it at the start of the matches, but if we hit 1,000 views on the match number 1 video by the time that I release the 3rd video of that series, I'm actually going to do an entirely new deck series as well this week. So if I get to the 3rd episode and the 1st episode has 1,000 views, then you'll have a brand new 3-episode deck as well to showcase off. So I hope you guys enjoy that if we manage to hit that target. I'm excited to do so. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.